everyone. Welcome to the Charvak podcast. This is your host Kushal Mehra. All right, my guest today is Sreemoy Talukdar. Sreemoy is a senior editor at Firstpost. You know him from Twitter. He regularly writes on politics, international relations, and strategic affairs. He has recently written a series of op-eds which cover AUKUS, Quad, and Indo-China relations and Indo-American relations. And I reached out to Sreemoy and told them, Sreemoy, come on the podcast and we can have a chat about it. So Sreemoy, thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks for inviting me, Kushal. Great to be here.
All right, so Shrimar, let's start with this. Although today's podcast is primarily focused on Indo-China and in China-US, but I just wanted to get this topic because I really liked your op-ed which you had written on AUKUS and Quad. So just briefly, if you could tell everyone what AUKUS AUKUS, I don't know what it is called, is, and what is the Quad, and how does one have any effect on the other? That's what I wanted because you wrote a beautiful op-ed on this, and I just wanted that to be spoken about too.
Thanks, Kushal. My position has been that AUKUS, which is primarily a security alliance between US, UK, and Australia, instead of hampering Quad, will aid Quad in many ways. That was my primary position. But before I go into that, let me just discuss the AUKUS bit. AUKUS sounds a very awkward kind of a acronym, but basically it means that the US will share the nuclear submarine technology with Australia, and this is something which the US has not done before. It has done this only with the UK, and that too, I think, in the 1950s. It is the crowning glory of its military technology, and it is loath to share this technology with even its closest allies. So, the fact that the US is sharing this tells us a lot about how it perceives the threat arising from China and how it perceives Australia to be a very crucial peg in that strategy. Now, the moment this came out into the open, there were a lot of reactions. The first reaction was, of
Hmm.
course, by France, because
Yeah.
France felt hard done by because Australia cancelled its submarine deal with France, which it had struck amid a lot of fanfare, and actually the French industry was had put in a lot of effort, and I think it also meant a lot for France. It provided jobs, and it was a very big thing for France. So they were hard done by. They felt betrayed by Australia and in the US. So there was a French reaction. Here in India, there was a clamor that, and ironically, this announcement came when Modi was in the US
Hmm.
for the Quad in-person meeting. So there was a clamor in India that this is an example of untrustworthy US, and how it has not given India the technology, but it has chosen to give it to Australia, and it was thought to be an undermining of the Quad, which I don't think is the case. Why do I think so? First of all, I think that it is a little preposterous for India to demand, and India did ask for this technology, but US denied it. I don't think that India is in a position to demand this because it simply does not share a security alliance with the US. It's as simple as that. India, because of many reasons, primarily I think because of its post-colonial experience, it prefers not to go into security alliances with any country. That is fine, but then we have to deal with the fallout of these decisions. We can't say that we will not go into security alliance with anyone, but yet at the same time, despite retaining our strategic autonomy, we will demand every piece of shiny new tech that comes out from other places. Uh, that
True.
is a that is a preposterous position to take. That is number one. Number two, I think AUKUS will actually aid Quad because at the end of the day, what is Quad? The Quad has stretched itself a lot since its initial days, and right now it encompasses a lot of agendas. But at its core, this grouping of four democracies is basically aimed at shaping the behavior of China. It is not a military alliance, first of all, and India has been very clear on that. In fact, the foreign secretary recently clarified that even the Malabar exercises is not linked to the Quad, which I think is going to a bit extreme. But Quad is not a military alliance. At least till now, it does not have a military component. It is not an Asian NATO. So what exactly is it? Quad is a loose grouping of four Indo-Pacific democracies who do a lot of things together, but their primary thing is to shape the behavior of China. According and along with that, because of the pandemic, the Quad also wants to come out with vaccines for the Indo-Pacific countries because it believes that China, by dint of the fact that it has a lot of clout by sharing these vaccines, it wants to counter that influence. It also wants to invest in building infrastructure that does not put the countries under a lot of debt burden. It wants to it wants to maintain the rules based order. It wants to keep the trading lines free in South China Sea, which China wants to monopolize for itself. So all these things are Quad. Now, how does AUKUS aid Quad? My contention is that India's main threat from China comes from the land. India is primarily invested in the land border with China. Its own focus remains on the land, and this threat is not going away anytime soon. So, if Australia, by dint of getting possession of nuclear capable submarines, can take care of the maritime flank, then it would only will help India, because India and Australia are like minded nations. They don't have enmity between them. In fact, their strategic partnership is growing. So, if one strategic partner can actually cover to secure the maritime flank for India, it will all be better. Why should there be a direct conflict? I think that this is my reasoning behind saying that I think AUKUS will actually aid Quad.
All right, got it. Now we get into the crux of today's discussion, which is not just Indo-China relations. We'll start with Indo-American relation, American and Chinese relations. So I don't know. Let's start like this, Shrimoy. So, what do you think the state of affairs is right now? As far as, is this the new Cold War, or is this the new war between the two big superpowers as we are? And do you think, I don't know, is some kind of conflict or confrontation now unavoidable?
Well, a lot of questions rolled into one. I'll take up one by one. Do I think there is a Cold War? Yes, there is. I think the US and China are already in the middle of a Cold War, even if they might not be ready to admit so, simply because of the fact that the the rivalry, the great power rivalry, is unavoidable. China, by the fact that it is growing so rich, and the moment a country grows rich and the moment it has a large amount of population, it readily converts that economic power into military power, which China has done. Now, what is your aim behind converting your economic power into military power? Your aim is primarily to project your power in the near region so that you become a regional hegemon, and eventually you project your power globally so that you take on the US, which is the reigning hegemon. So now, when the US, as the reigning hegemon, looks at China, which is an upstart, which is coming up and challenging it in many domains, then obviously the US, without even even if it doesn't want to, it will have to take on China. Look at what is happening here. China is seeking to maximizing its wealth, its influence, and its power. And not just that, it is also rewriting the rules which the US has laid for its own benefit so far. But China wants to rewrite those rules because it wants those rules to aid its own rise. So, inevitably, there is a clash which touches on multiple domains. The main conflict between US and China is structural as well as ideological as well, because China not only is a structural rival of the US, it is also an ideological rival, because increasingly China
True.
is championing its own political ideology. It is telling the world, and because of the fact that Chinese political system has been so successful in gaining wealth for its citizens, other countries are too attracted to that. And this is the reason why Chinese political system is gaining currency, and the US has waged an ideological war against it, and Biden has been very clear on that. But the problem starts because US is unlike China, which is not a democracy, and it can ignore a lot of public action and reaction because it controls the avenues of expression through media. It can make its policies in a much more shall I say pointed way. Unlike that, the US is a very it is just a very noisy democracy, just like all democracies are. What has happened
Hmm.
with the latest power shift in the US and with Biden coming into the picture, as I see it, is that when Biden first came into White House initially, he promised extreme competition with China. That it's in itself was a little different from what he had promised during his campaigning stage. During his campaigning stage, at one point of time, Biden had famously said that, do you think China will eat our lunch? Come on, that's not going to happen. That was his position during the campaigning stage. I think it was 2019 or so. But Biden readily changed that position when he came into the White House, and he and his team identified China as the main threat and an existential threat, and he promised extreme competition against the Chinese. But then the
Hmm.
problem started, and the problem started because China is also it has its own agency. It knows that if the US takes an extremely ideological and a structural, it behaves like a structural rival, then it becomes difficult for China. So China wanted to then exercise its own leverages into this relationship, and one of the leverages that came very handy was the climate action. See, as the leader of the Democratic Party, the climate change is of existential importance to Biden and his team. And there is a progressive corner in the Democratic Party that wants U.S. China cooperation, because it believes that otherwise this the goal of climate action, which is getting the global temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius, will not be achieved. So it is now actively pressurizing the Biden administration to mend its relationship with China, and this position has given China a lot of leverage, because it has clearly told the US that unless you are backing off from an adversarial position on the other areas of the bilateral relationship, which is your position on human rights, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet, and trade, cyber theft, then do not think that we will cooperate with you on the climate action thing. Now, this is
Mm.
essentially the message which John Kerry got when he went to China recently. Kerry came back. Obviously, there was a lot of heated debate inside the Biden administration, and right now we are seeing a palpable shift from the Biden administration from competition towards engagement, something which has not borne fruit for the US in the past, and I am pretty sure it is not going to bear fruit for China again. It's just handing the leverage to China.
But then now I want to get into another aspect of the American and Chinese relation. Well, what about Taiwan? Um, so this is you a lot of back and forth has happened when it comes to. In fact, was it the Chinese state media that said, oh, if we do something and we attack Taiwan, the Americans are not going to respond, blah blah blah. So do you think that is going to be the next big flashpoint when it comes to Chinese relations with the United States of America?
Well, that is what China would like the world to believe. China got an opportunity during the recent very chaotic withdrawal by the US from Afghanistan to portray to the world, and specifically to Taiwan, that the US is an unreliable ally. The moment when Afghanistan chaos happened, and when we all saw, or how messy it was, then there was a series of editorials in Chinese state media, all directed towards Taiwan, saying that, look, Afghanistan used to be an ally of the US. This is how an ally is getting treated by Washington. Do not think that if you invade you, this country will come and help you in any way, because US
Exactly.
simply doesn't. US simply does not have any credibility left. That was the
Yeah.
narrative which China came out with. The US saw this, and it also understood that this is damaging to its own narrative, and it is damaging the stability of the Taiwan Strait. There is an agreement between the US and China on Taiwan. What is that agreement? It was struck in 1979. The agreement was that the US will consider Taiwan as part of China. It will always refer to it the one China policy. However, it will maintain a strategic ambiguity on whether it will defend Taiwan or not if China invades it. The US has
Correct.
never made this policy clear. It believes that this strategic ambiguity best serves the interests of Taiwan Strait, because, according to the US, if it clarifies that yes, I am going to defend Taiwan, then China might be tempted to attack Taiwan just to test that, and the US will then be drawn into a war. So the US wants to keep that a little vague, but it wants to keep selling weapons to Taiwan, and from time to time sending coded messages to say that we have your back to Taiwan. That is the position. Now, when China started spreading this narrative that the US is an unreliable ally, it pushed the US to a corner where it had to commit itself to Taiwan in a much more, let's say, a much more clearer way than it would have ideally liked. So, the US State Department came out with a series of statements saying that our commitment to Taiwan is rock solid. Now, as it
Hmm.
happens, as you rightly pointed out about this back and forth on Taiwan, this created a counter reaction in China. So China came out with its own set of action, and what was that set of action? Increasingly, we saw that China is making some very provocative moves on the Taiwan Strait. It is regularly sending its fighter jets on the Taiwan's air defense identification zone. It is called ADIS in short. So on
Hmm.
I think it was on October 4th, if I'm not wrong. Yes, on October 4th, it sent 56 PLA jets to Taiwan's airspace. And overall, during that week, it sent 145 jets. And basically, and it was very clear to everyone that China is bullying Taiwan.
Yeah.
And during at that point of time, Biden and Xi Jinping had a phone call. I think it was the US was quite alarmed about what was happening, and apparently they decided that they will both abide by the Taiwan agreement. Now, my reading of the situation is that the Taiwan incident, or whatever is being happening in Taiwan, is a whole lot of rhetoric, and it is a feint. It is not really China's plan right now to invade Taiwan. Why am I saying that? Because I believe that the Chinese will never start a war unless it is sure of winning it. China has never been a very, the Chinese Communist Party is a very rational actor. It might pose to be a very warmongering and aggressive force, but it is also a very rational actor. It it can never be sure that if it attacks Taiwan, that the US will not come to Taiwan's aid, and it can never be sure that if it attacks Taiwan, the resultant US-China war will end favorably for China. So that is a risk which I don't think that Xi Jinping, at least before the 20th Party Congress, where he is slated to get his third term, is a risk which Xi Jinping is willing to take. He is obviously doing a lot of rhetoric here because he wants his nation to know that he wants his nation to see that he's very strong and Taiwan will always remain a part of China. This is all for domestic consumption. I do not believe that this is in reality. There is a chance that that China will invade Taiwan, and I think the U.S. intelligence community also has the same assessment. They have come out with the same assessment that there is no possibility of an invasion right now. However, the heightened tension around Taiwan is is indicative, and it has caused many analysts to say that it could be a flashpoint. That is, however, not my reading of the situation. I believe that it is more of a rhetoric which is going on, and both sides are posturing.
But then what do you make of, there are so many steps that China has taken on the nuclear front, especially this latest testing of the hypersonic glide
Yeah.
missile system. So
Mhm.
what is it trying to show there? Then what is
Uh,
happening over there?
yeah, so that's very interesting. I think what China has done, China has taken a series of steps on the nuclear front. It has, first of all, it has tested a hypersonic glide vehicle. That hypersonic glide vehicle has two parts. It has one glide vehicle part which is hypersonic, and also which is called a fractional orbital bombardment system, or FOBS. This was tested by the USSR back in the Cold War days. At the same
Mhm.
time, it has also it has I'll just tell you the exact number. It has also, it is raiding 250 long-range missile silos in a part of Mongolia, and it is also using a space-based early warning system for its missile launches. Now, I think all these point to the fact, and some analysts have pointed out that China is trying to do two things. It is trying to improve its survivability and its penetrability of the nuclear weapons. Now, why would China want to do that? And why now? I think what has happened here is that China has realized that since the trajectory of US China relationship is heading towards a friction, and if not a hot action, it will be a Cold War kind of a scenario. It must gear up on its nuclear armament front, where it seriously lags behind the US. But why is it doing it now? That is the question which many analysts have tackled, that this is something which China could have done earlier as well. Why is it doing it now? I think part of the reason, and once again, this is a hypothesis, but this is what I think. I think part of the reason is that if it wants to ensure that, given a situation where there is a conflict in Taiwan, the US cannot use its nuclear superiority as a motivating factor in that conflict. Or, in other words, it wants a stalemate with the US in the nuclear arena, so that when that stalemate on the nuclear arena is achieved, in the conventional war scenario, it can challenge the US in a much more greater way. Because the US is a greater nuclear power than China is right now, it helps China to achieve some sort of parity on the nuclear front, so that in the conventional front, where China and US's military strengths are more equitable, China can actually challenge the US, or it can go ahead and start a war with Taiwan without worrying too much about US nuclear capability. So I believe that this is one of the reasons why it has started taking these actions right now. Basically, if I were to sort of put it in one line, I would say that it is trying to reach a stalemate at the nuclear level, so that it can exploit that stalemate and then challenge the status quo at the conventional level which exists between US and China, so that if there is a war, there is no fear of nuclear war, but in the conventional war, it can subdue the US in that geography. I think that is China's calculation.
All right. So basically, what you're saying is the latest steps that is has taken. This is like, if I was to preface it properly, this is some sort of a bargaining chip where,
Kind of, yes.
if you do this, we can do that. So China is peacocking. That's what it's doing.
If you could say that, I think it is more of it is trying to achieve some sort of theoretical bargaining position with the US so that it can deter the US from taking any action were it to invade Taiwan. See, all these
All right.
postures are hypothetical, but at the same time, all states are insecure beings, and states always act under the assumption that the other state is going to attack it. So that is the security spiral which sometimes leads us to war. Anyway.
All right, now let's get into the whole Indo-China relationship. So
Oh yeah.
maybe we start from what do you think is the current state of affairs, and then maybe we get into the whole Indo-China, border standoff. So what do you make of it? In fact, a live viewer has also asked a border-related question. Um, so, in fact, they have said that even if China and India formally signed a treaty to settle its border issues, why should India even trust China to abide by any treaty?
Well, that's a very valid question. In one word, Kushal, I'm worried. I'm very worried about what is happening in the border region, and I think that we are in for a very hot winter. And I will say what eventually I'll explain, but I want to say that first up, I believe that a short but sharp conflict, maybe in the eastern sector of the LAC in the Arunachal Pradesh region, it can break out, and break out quite soon. I think that is my reading of the situation. Now, what is the current status? Uh, it was very depressing to see that the 13th round of military level talks reach a stalemate. Now, stalemate has been reached before, but what was worrying this time was the kind of language both sides used to explain what has happened during the meeting. India said that we came out with a series of offerings, series of suggestions, which China did not take. India has never been so explicit before. China, in
Mm.
turn, said that India is making some unreasonable demands. So, and because India is taking those unreasonable claims and demands, obviously the talks have failed. Now, in China's position, it is quite apparent that what they are up to, even though they have not admitted it. What is India's unreasonable demand? India's only demand has been that let us revert to the April 2020 status quo. That has been India's sole demand during the border negotiations, a
Mm.
demand which China now calls unreasonable. Why would a demand China? Why would it? Why would China call a demand to return to pre-April 2020 status quo unreasonable? It can only say so if it has already encroached on territory which India considers as its own, and India is asking it to push back. It is asking it to withdraw, and it is saying that, look, boss, we are not going to do that because your demand is unreasonable. So I think willy nilly, it's an admission from China. They're encroaching on the territory which I believe is in the territory which both sides claim in along the LAC. So that is the situation right now. Now, for any negotiation to succeed, we need leverages. What leverages
Mm.
does India have? And once again, we head towards another very worrying conclusion. You will notice that the Pangong disengagement happened, but while the disengagement took place, India gave up its own positions on the Kailash Heights. Now, it was pretty obvious that India's leverage, which was gaining the Kailash Height region, that was bartered away during the Pangong disengagement, and I think that
Mm.
that happened. I'm forgetting the dates. Then later on, we also saw another disengagement in the Gogra region. But ever since, nothing has moved forward. It is now quite clear that China perceives that India has no more leverage left. And unless India has any leverage, it will not be able to force China out of those positions where it is encroaching on simply by persuading it to do so. And China is taking a very hard line, increasingly harder line, because if you look at what has happened recently, it has passed a border law where it is now going to legitimize those land grabs, not just in India but also in Bhutan. What does this border
Mm.
law say? This border law says that all Chinese territory is inviolable, and if anyone tries to encroach on those territory, there will be a combat. So this is an open intimidation of India and Bhutan, saying that, look, we have grabbed whatever we could, and now if you want us to withdraw from these regions, you'll have a heavy price to pay. This is what they're saying in effect by their border law. And remember, it is not just India. China has also grabbed a lot of Bhutanese land, and not just that, it has also brought in settlers from all around Tibet and put them on those border villages as a way of
mm,
legitimizing their claim over those disputed lands. And to put pressure on India, it has also reportedly struck an MOU with Bhutan. We do not know the details of this MOU, but Chinese media has gone to town claiming that this MOU with Bhutan is landmark, it is groundbreaking, and this will pave the way for disengage. This will pave the way for a border deal between China and India. Now, obviously, this raises nervousness in India, because any deal between China and Bhutan will also involve India, because Bhutan's territory and some strategic areas of Bhutan's territory is strategically very vulnerable and very important for India. You know what happened during Doklam when they tried
mhm,
to build a road in the Doklam Valley, which actually overlooks the Siliguri corridor of India, and India would have
mhm,
could have not afforded not to react, so they had to react. So we have seen media reports. It says that right now there is at least till now there is the tri-junction area is not part of the deal, but we do not know what is going to happen in the future. So that is a nervous that is there is a nervousness inside India. That is a pressure point which China is pressing on. On the other hand, along with this, it is also doing a lot of things in the eastern sector. While we are remaining engaged in the western sector of Ladakh, in the eastern sector, they are really upping the ante. And a series of media reports say that a lot of activity is going on in those regions. First of all, there are live fire drills which is going on, nighttime drills. The there are shelters for the soldiers so that they can survive the bitter winter. Along with that, PLA's higher officials are all coming and visiting those areas very frequently, and the very state of the art equipment is being deployed, and those equipment are used to conduct military exercises, basically to intimidate in India. And
mm,
I think today the Hindustan Times has come out with a report which clearly says that at least there are 3 points. I think it's called. I'm forgetting the names of those 3 points where India perceives that very heightened amount of activity, and Indian forces are on very high alert, and they have matched their deployment. So all in all, the situation is very tense. It is like being in a tinderbox, and it's very worrying. I think for India, it is certainly very worrying.
all right. Okay, Shrimoy, now let's start taking a few live viewers' questions. So I'll start with the first one and then we'll follow it up. So, okay, the first question is: isn't it better for India to focus on becoming a member of the Five Eyes intelligence network, as has been mooted in a recent US Congress committee report?
Well, I think this is a decision which India cannot take by its own. For India to become a part of that Five Eyes intelligence network, it will have to have some sort of a formal alliance with the US or any of these countries. But the problem with India is that it detests going into alliance with any country. That has been India's stated position, regardless of the government. And I think for better or for worse, India is going to stick to it. It believes that this position, that is remaining retaining its strategic autonomy, serves its interests the best, and it can and I don't think it has any plans of going into any alliance. The second thing is that the best thing for India, if that is the question, what is the best thing? I think the best thing for
Mhm.
India to deter China is to grow strong, post
Yeah.
double digit GDP growth for 2 decades and catch China by the horns. But that will take some doing.
Mm. And that will take this country to get over socialism, and that's a lot of taking. So, all right, another question. Okay, this is interesting because you made a different prognosis or hypothesis here. So this question says: isn't the world, especially India, overestimating China's military capabilities and economic sustainability? The Chinese are known to be irrational, and they also have to have blind spots. So, what do you think?
Well, I hope we are overestimating, but I suspect we are not. uh, and I don't think China is an irrational actor. I think China is a highly rational actor. It understands the
Mm,
security dilemmas very well. It employs leverages very well. It is a hyper realist power. It doesn't believe in idealism when it comes to projecting its own power. And whether China has weaknesses, sure it does. Whether China's economic progress has stalled, yes, it is stalling. It is stalling due to a number of reasons, and China is facing a lot of internal problems. But that said, China's economy is still 5 times that of India's, and it is competing with the US in terms of military prowess, and India is miles away from that when it comes to China's economic as well as military prowess. The one thing which works for India is that the Himalayan terrain where this conflict is likely to take place, that to a certain degree nullifies China's advantage in terms of military prowess, because it introduces some factors in the conflict which India is better able, due to its superior army which has fought a lot of wars. It is better able to tackle those. We've seen that during the gaining of Kailash Heights. But that said, that is a limited advantage. You will also notice that China had a drawback in terms of air power, because it did not have a sort of um, I'm forgetting the term. It did not have the capability to launch its fighter jets from very close in the border. Something which India had, because it had its sorry the term. The place where the air takes off, the fighter jets takes off. So that launch pads. Now these launch pads are coming up in Tibet. So that differential between India and China is now getting reduced almost in a daily basis. And I don't think that we can rest on this assumption that China must be having its weakness. Its military might not be as powerful as it claims to be, and then it is not for us to take that position. On the other hand, we should be doubly careful, and we should strategize on the belief that Chinese military is quite strong, and we should do our best to nullify that position. I think that is the rational position for us to take. Whether or not China has its vulnerabilities, I'm sure it has, but those vulnerabilities are I'm not sure that that will come into play in this conflict if it were to break out between India and China in the border regions.
All right. Okay. So next question is, how crucial is Nepal in the Indo-China equation? Does India need to pay more attention to relations with Nepal, lest they entirely align with China?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, Nepal has always been at the center of India and China relationships. It's this is not a new thing. It has been the case since India became independent. Something which Jawaharlal Nehru himself had admitted. The crucial position that Nepal enjoys in between India and China. What has happened now increasingly is that uh, as with every other thing, China's economic prowess has grown. So since China has become very wealthy, it can now afford to spend a lot of money in uh, in luring these states, which historically has a lot of cultural and historical and traditional ties with India, in luring these states into its own circle, simply because it can fund a lot of things. And just like any other country, just like any other small and poor country, Nepal needs a lot of infrastructure. It needs a lot of investment, and China is in a better position than India to feed these investments need, to feed these infrastructure needs. So naturally there will be some degree of influence of China inside Nepal. That influence can only grow, but India is also not sitting idle. I think there was some sort of a miscalculation at one point of time when India thought that uh, pressurizing Nepal or using coercive tactics will help Nepal be on India's side more than on Chinese side, but it backfired. And ever since, India has been careful not to go down that road again. I think you will find now that India and Nepal's relationship is right now is more of an even keel, and Indian leaders, political leaders, they go out of their way to convey a message to Nepal that they are a very important part, a very important ally for India. And I think that whatever we could have done, whatever we can do, we are doing. But because of the fact that China is so wealthy, and it we can't really go into a competition of checkbook diplomacy with them. That is not really in our ability. We can of course stress on our historical, religious and cultural ties, societal ties, and we are doing that. We are also helping Nepal in other ways, but as far as checkbook diplomacy is concerned, I think China will always have an edge.
Right? The same logic applies to Sri Lanka, right? This whole checkbook diplomacy thing. We just don't have the resources beyond a point. China just outbids us, right? In most cases.
Right, but then there is also a flip side to it, because of the fact that these entities, which through which China, extends its influences, which are part of this the Belt and Road network. There's a flip side. The flip side is that more often than not, these to it has been seen that these infrastructure puts the host country under a huge amount of Chinese debt, and slowly that debt compels these countries to part with their crucial infrastructure needs. And this is what has happened in Sri Lanka. It has been forced to give away Hambantota port to China. Many other countries are finding that Chinese infrastructure come with a lot of strings, and they're ruining the fact that and Sri Lanka is also suffering because it is really struggling to repay the debts. Pakistan is also struggling. The
Mm,
problem, however, is that even though they are struggling, even though they are really stretching their budgets and they are mortgaging their properties away to China, as it were, but it is
mhm,
still China which comes out with these offers. The other countries, and here I will call the Quad, the Indo-Pacific democracies, for all their talk, for all their resolutions, and for all their statements, they have not been able to really come out with an alternative. There have been discussions. We know about Blue Dot Network. We know about building back better infrastructure, where the US and India and all the other Quad democracies have promised that they will give better alternatives to China in terms of infrastructure. We haven't really seen that. I think unless that happens for a smaller country which is in dire need of infrastructure as well as investment, the Chinese option will always be more attractive. Even though you know that farther down the road you might have to part with your property, you might have to part with one island, but still these countries are willing to take that risk. That is what China is tapping in. That is what it is banking on.
all right. So one more question, and maybe we can wrap it up. I know you have a time constraint. So somebody has asked, a live viewer has asked, does India continue to underestimate China's ruthlessness in a weird way, and as a result of that, show itself to be tactically and strategically dumb?
I don't know. I don't think India underestimates China's ruthlessness. I think, if anything, it understands China better than perhaps the Western nations. It 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 took a decision and banned all the apps from Indian market, which I think was a decision which other countries seriously considering taking. At least the US was seriously considering taking. It has also highlighted the problems with BRI much earlier than other countries did. In fact, when BRI was launched, India was absent from that launch, and
Yeah.
it said that it said quite clearly that this is something which we don't support because it violates our sovereignty, and of course there is a debt trap which is associated with it. So India has been quite clear-eyed about China. I think more so than other Western nations, certainly European nations, who still hope to somehow sell their cars to China while mouth, the odd statement about Xinjiang and Tibet and Hong Kong, but all they're interested
Hmm.
is securing more business deals with China, economic deals. India has certainly been more clear-eyed, and the Biden administration, which seems to be quite confused right now between competition and engagement. One part of the Biden administration, like Jake Sullivan, he says that we should be we should be very careful in not trading off competition with China while getting cooperation from them on climate. But John Kerry says that, look, unless the situation improves between US and China, I'll not be able to reach my target. So he's junking he's been the man behind scuttling the Uyghur Forced Labor Act. So I think India is more clear-eyed, but India has limitations. India's limitations sometimes forces India to manage the relationship with China rather than confrontation, simply because we are not quite there where we want to be. Which is why I said that for India to effectively take on China, the first thing would be to put your head down and and just record near double-digit growth for 2 decades. Do internal balancing, and if you grow strong, the other things will fall in place. The problem with India, however, is that it's a democracy, and any democracy, when it goes through reforms, it will not be as smooth as it was with China, because it could simply, plow through the certain thing. It could simply force some certain reforms into place, which is more difficult for a country like India. So we'll have to be more patient. To answer the question in a short way, no, I don't think India is starry-eyed about China at all. Quite the contrary, in fact.
All right. So, Shima, I know we have to wrap things up. So, but before we go, is there anything else you would like to add, or any new project that you're working on? Would you like to tell us about that?
Well, not project, but I do write on strategic affairs, and I'm continuing to write on that. India and China and Chinese elite politics is something which really interests me. People who follow me on Twitter handle would know that I invest a lot of time in reading up and on sharing stuff on China. So that is something in which my interests lie. I'm certainly very curious to see how this leading up to the 20th Party Congress shapes up, because I believe that this is a situation in which China, in order to hide its internal vulnerabilities, will do a lot of power flexing on the outside just to keep the domestic audience distracted, because there's a lot of things which is going on in China right now which are not good. Xi Jinping, he might show that he's a man in control and he has all the power, but you'll be surprised to know that he's been launching a series of purges inside the police force and inside the intelligence community, and apparently many people are being caught who are quote unquote planning wrong things against the core leader. Apparently, it is another way of saying that they are planning conspiracies. So Xi Jinping is a very insecure person, and
He's
he
worried.
doesn't trust anyone. So for a person who's insecure, who poses to be all powerful, he has to have some external power flexing to keep the narrative in check. And I think that is why the chances of a conflict with China along the Arunachal becomes that much higher, which is why I'm a little worried. Had it been a stable period inside China, perhaps the hope for a negotiated settlement would have been greater. But right now, this is where I'm a little worried about how things are shaping up.
Got it. Got it. All right, Shrimoy. We'll wrap it up for the day. As always, pleasure talking to you. Thanks a lot for
Thanks,
coming on the
Kushal.
podcast.
Thanks for the great questions. I hope I was able to answer them.
Uh, all right, guys. So please follow Shrimoy on Twitter. So if you go to the description of this podcast, whether you're watching this on YouTube right now or listening to this on Spotify, iTunes, wherever, please go on the description, and for you'll have Shrimoy's Twitter handle over there. Also, I have kept a link to all of Shrimoy's articles which he writes regularly in Firstpost. So I would recommend all of you to please go and read them and follow him on Twitter. We'll wrap today's discussion up. Please subscribe to the channel. Subscribe also on the audio portals. Like the video. Leave a comment even on the audio portals. If you want to support the Chavak podcast monetarily, you can become a member on Patreon or on YouTube, or you can send your donations directly to UPI or buy the Charvak podcast merch either on Kadak merch or on kushalmehra.com. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, take care. Goodbye.